Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot. Not just turn on the fan, hot. No, we're talking ancient Persian plateau, hot. Picture it. Miles of ochre sand, the faint shimmer of heat ghosts rising from the ground, and an orange sun hanging low like it's been glued in place for hours. And yet, somewhere out here, tucked beneath domes of mud brick and mystery, people are keeping ice. Yes, actual ice. In the desert. You trudge along a dusty camel path, sandals scuffing through grainy gravel, and you're already regretting not bringing a canteen. The air is bone dry and somehow managing to feel both stifling and sharp. You catch sight of a group of locals wearing light linen robes and wide-brimmed felt hats, moving about their business with no particular urgency. One of them casually sips from a clay cup. You notice it beads with condensation. You blink, in this heat? Ice-cold water? You probably won't survive this without sunscreen and a time-traveling cooler. But you keep walking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is setting now, slipping behind jagged mountains in the distance. The sky turns lavender, then a deep, inky blue. And as darkness falls, something odd begins to happen. The temperature plummets. What was scorching just hours ago becomes brisk enough to make you pull your robe tighter. This is no accident. Ancient Persians knew this was coming. In fact, they counted on it. You're in a village on the edge of an oasis near what's now central Iran. Thousands of years ago, long before the invention of electricity or refrigeration, people here figured out a way to bend the desert's rhythm to their needs. They didn't fight the heat. They used it. Or more accurately, they used the lack of it at night. As you walk, you pass quiet homes made of mud and straw nestled low against the earth to stay cool during the day. Chickens cluck softly in their coops, and a sleepy donkey flicks its ears in the dark. And then, looming at the far end of the settlement, you see it. A massive, beehive-shaped structure poking up from the earth like the fossilized shell of some forgotten creature. It's not just decorative. This is a yakchal, literally, ice pit. It's quiet now, but during the day these domes echo with footsteps, voices, and the occasional shout of someone who's gotten just a little too excited about cold melon. You pause to admire the design. Tall and smooth, made of a special mud brick mix called saroj, which includes sand, clay, lime, egg whites, and goat hair. Yes, goat hair. It's surprisingly waterproof, and it resists both heat and time. Inside the yakchal, deep below ground, is where the real magic happens. This is where the ice is stored. Not made, not conjured, but preserved. And it works so well that even in summer, the villagers can pull out sheets of ice like it's no big deal. You peer through a small opening and feel a breeze, strangely cool, brushing against your cheek. Like the earth itself is exhaling. Historians still argue whether the idea of the yakchal originated from necessity or from a kind of proto-engineering obsession. Some say it began with accidental discoveries. Water kept in shaded pits that froze overnight. Others suggest it was a deliberate feat, born from the minds of ancient architects who understood thermodynamics before we even had a word for it. You take a seat on a low bench near the dome, listening to the rustle of palm trees swaying in the night breeze. Someone brings you a small bowl, thick, ceramic, and chilled. Inside is a sweet, milky drink flavored with rose water and saffron. You sip. It's cold. Delightfully, astonishingly cold. Your eyebrows rise. Someone chuckles beside you. Yakchal? They say with a smile. It works. You lean back, staring up at the night sky. A galaxy of stars scattered like sugar across black silk. And you start to understand the beauty of this place. Not just the stark, elegant structures, but the lifestyle. The trust in nature's rhythms. The idea that if you dig deep enough, build smart enough, and wait long enough, You can have snow in the middle of a desert. You think back to your own fridge at home, humming dutifully, packed with hummus, sparkling water, and probably that one yogurt that's way past its expiration date. But here, every cube of ice is a quiet triumph. Not a convenience, but a conquest. And they didn't stop at storage. The Persians became artists of chill. They watched the skies, measured wind patterns, and studied how sun hit different surfaces at different angles. They noticed that some nights dropped far below freezing, even in the desert, and they made plans. They laid stones to catch and release heat, built channels to guide water into shallow basins, and then they waited. Under the stars, the desert itself became a freezer. One of the elders tells you how they used to place straw over the surface to protect forming ice from stray animals. Sometimes, if the wind was right, the ice would be ready by morning. Other times it took several nights. The whole process felt like farming, but for cold. And when the harvest came, oh, it was a celebration. Ice was cut, stacked, and packed in straw. Then it was lowered into the deep belly of the yakchal, where it would sleep through summer like some frozen dragon hoarding treasure. Quirkier traditions grew up around the process. You learned that in some towns, children weren't allowed near the ice harvest because they might bring warm hands and melt the bounty. Others whispered that certain families had cold luck. Their ice never broke, never cracked, and always lasted longer. And all this in a world where you'd expect nothing but sand and sweat. Of course, not everyone agreed on the methods. Some historians claim that freezing water in the open desert was too inefficient, and that most of the ice came from higher altitudes, carried down by caravans and stored in the yakchal. Others believe both were true. Local freezing when possible, importing when necessary. There are even arguments about which cities did it best: Yazd, Kerman, Isfahan. Honestly, you suspect the locals still debated over tea. Whatever the source, the point remains. You're sipping cold drinks in the middle of ancient Persia, under a sky full of stars. And it's all because someone long ago decided that ice didn't belong only to the mountains. A bell rings somewhere in the distance. Soft, musical. Someone is closing the village gate. You're offered a thick woolen blanket and motioned toward a low cot nearby. You lie down, the scent of rosewater still lingering in your nose. And as your eyes grow heavy, you wonder, who first had the audacity to say, "Yes, we'll make ice," right here in the desert? You wake before dawn, stirred by the soft shuffle of sandals on dirt, and the low murmur of villagers starting their day. Above you, the stars are fading into a pale indigo sky. The temperature, still clinging to the night's chill, is surprisingly pleasant. You sit up, blanket slipping from your shoulders, and glance again at the strange dome of the yakchal, looming in silhouette like some ancient space capsule half buried in sand. A young boy passes with a basket of something you can't quite identify. Small clay jars, their sides darkened with dew. You follow him, barefoot and curious, toward a narrow staircase carved directly into the hard-packed earth. You descend into the belly of the yakchal. Immediately, the air shifts. It's not just cooler, it's heavier, hushed, like a deep breath being held for centuries. The staircase spirals downward, the walls smooth and slightly damp to the touch. You hear the soft drip of melting ice somewhere nearby, but the scent down here is clean, earthy, mineral, like a cave carved by time and intention. The chamber at the bottom opens suddenly, revealing a space so wide and silent it feels like a secret. You half expect to find a forgotten pharaoh snoozing next to the ice. Instead, what you see is snow. Or what was snow? Massive blocks of ice, stacked neatly like glassy books in a chilly underground library. Some are covered in straw. Others glisten softly in the gloom, reflecting faint light that seeps in from high vents. You swear the air itself is blue. And somehow, miraculously, it hasn't melted. Not even in the cruel heat of summer. You pause, soaking in the paradox. Up there, roasted dates and sun-scorched stone. Down here, A winter's day preserved beneath the dust. The secret lies in the structure. The yakchal isn't just a dome plopped on dirt. It's a feat of layered logic and cleverness. Above ground, the tall conical shape captures hot air and funnels it up and away. Inside, the thick mud brick walls, often more than 2 meters thick at the base, act like thermal shields, repelling daytime heat and locking in cool air like a jealous dragon guarding its hoard. Some walls even contain salt and ash to keep insects and dampness at bay. But the real trick? You're standing in a pit, sometimes up to 5 meters deep. The deeper the pit, the colder it stays. In fact, archaeologists believe these pits could keep ice stable for months, sometimes up to the next winter. That's right, last year's snowball might still be chilling down here. You hear voices above. Someone's lowering a small wooden sled into the pit with a squeaky rope. A chunk of ice the size of a dinner plate sits on top, glinting like a misplaced gem. Someone's breakfast just got fancy. You climb back up, shoes in hand, enjoying the contrast between the chilly interior and the warming morning air outside. The boy from earlier offers you one of the clay jars. You sip. It's yogurt, but smooth and faintly sweet, cooled to perfection. A light sprinkle of crushed mint and dill tickles your nose. You nod politely, trying to ignore the slight brain freeze. The boy beams. By now, the village is fully awake. Women sweep the courtyards, men lead camels toward the well, and someone is lighting a fire beneath a massive copper pot. From a shaded corner, an old man starts explaining the history of the structure. Not in a formal way, but like someone telling you where all the good fishing spots are. He says the yakchal is older than anyone can remember. Some claim it's from the Achaemenid period, back when Cyrus the Great ruled these lands and had a habit of founding empires before breakfast. Others argue it's younger, from the early Islamic era, when water management and civic planning became high art forms across the region. Historians still argue whether the Persian yakchal was a homegrown innovation or adapted from earlier Mesopotamian or even Egyptian techniques. There are records of ice storage in China and Greece too, but here, in this brutal, arid heat, Persia took it personally. There's also debate about whether these structures were reserved only for royalty and the elite, or if village communities like this one had their own humbler versions. Based on what you're seeing, kids running barefoot past ancient insulation, and women discussing the thickness of last year's straw bedding. It seems likely that ice was a shared resource. Carefully guarded, yes, but not forbidden. Quirkier still, the elder mentions a long-disputed myth. That certain yakshals made better ice, so pure, so unmelting, that people traveled for days to get it. He laughs, waving a hand like it's nonsense. But there's a gleam in his eye that says, but maybe, just maybe, you're ushered toward a small room attached to the yakchal. It's where records are kept, scratched onto clay tablets or stitched into leather-bound books. You're shown a sketch centuries old, detailing how one village timed the angle of the moon to optimize nightly ice formation. They believed that moonlight helped the water cool faster. You raise an eyebrow. The scribe shrugs. Can't hurt. You step outside, where the sun is now fully risen and the air has shifted from pleasant to I miss the pit levels of warm. And yet, no one seems bothered. They're used to it. You shade your eyes and notice how buildings are constructed to cast narrow shadows on the roads, forming ribbons of cool across the dusty path. And always, the yakchal stands at the center, like a silent promise. It will be hot, yes, but you'll get through it. There's ice. There's always ice. As you wander back through the village, you spot a small shrine nestled beside a garden. A statue stands there, worn smooth by centuries of sun and prayer. You're told it's a local spirit of coolness, half folklore, half inside joke. Supposedly, if you leave an offering of pomegranate or mint, your stored ice won't melt as quickly. You're tempted to try. You begin to realize that the yakchal wasn't just about survival, it was a point of pride. A marvel. a quiet defiance against the sun. Even the architecture around it seems to borrow its wisdom. Tall wind catchers, or bad gears, sprout from roofs like inverted chimneys, drawing hot air out and pulling cooler air in. Sometimes yakhchals were built near these wind towers, creating a synergy of chill. You could practically hear ancient engineers whispering to each other. Let the wind do the work. You sit again under a fig tree, drinking another impossibly cold rose drink. A cat curls beside you, stretched lazily across sun-warmed stones. You sigh, content. It's not just that these ancient Persians knew how to keep ice, it's how they did it. Patiently, cleverly, respectfully. Working with nature instead of against it. Trusting shade and depth and wind rather than trying to overpower the elements. And maybe that's what you're meant to learn here. Not just how to stay cool in a literal sense, but how to approach life. With quiet design, thoughtful rhythm, and a good bowl of frozen yogurt when things get tough. You're lying under the fig tree still, but the sun has climbed higher and the air's taken on that dry, toasted scent you only find in the desert, once the sand starts whispering underfoot. A chicken clucks nearby, oblivious to the brilliance of the world it inhabits. A world where people made refrigerators out of mud, starlight, and stubbornness. You rise slowly, the hem of your robe gathering dust as you walk toward a cluster of low buildings that huddle together like gossiping aunts. These are the ice makers' homes, keepers of cool secrets and frozen treasures. You're about to meet the people behind the miracle. There's a man leaning over a large basin of water, his face creased with focus and heat. He gestures for you to sit and begins to explain, not with words at first, but with motions. He dips a flat wooden scoop into the basin, then points to the sky, then the ground, and finally to a shallow trough behind him. It clicks. This is how the ice was made in the first place. Not just stored, but actually created in the desert. Here's how it works, in case you ever want to try it in your backyard, preferably in January. The process begins on winter nights, when the desert cools dramatically and the difference between day and night temperatures is enough to slap you awake. Shallow pools or long, narrow channels, usually stone or clay, are filled with water at sunset. They're placed in open-air courtyards surrounded by walls designed to block the sun and trap the cold. And then, they wait. The heat escapes into the endless star-pinned sky. The walls act as windbreaks, and the shallow depth means more surface area exposed to the cold. No fancy machinery, no freon, just patience. By dawn, a delicate sheet of ice forms across the top. Thin, fragile, but ice nonetheless. Workers like this man gently harvest the frozen layer before sunrise, stack it into straw-lined baskets, and carry it to the yakhchal for storage. They'll repeat this every clear night through the winter, building their icy reserve one fragile layer at a time. It's slow, it's tedious, it's brilliant. He chuckles softly, showing you a finger permanently bent from years of early morning frostbite. You grimace in sympathy, and he waves it off like someone showing off a prize scar from a camel bite. Comes with the job. You're invited to help harvest tonight's batch, which sounds fun until you realize it means waking up again before dawn. Still, you agree, because this is how history seeps into your bones. Not from scrolls, but from scooping ice by moonlight. But before that, there's time for tea. You join the ice team in a shady nook of the courtyard, where a samovar steams quietly and the scent of cardamom mingles with the earthy aroma of yesterday's sun. Cups are passed around, delicate, handleless, and filled with golden warmth. Talk turns to rival villages. Apparently the next town over claims to have once filled an entire yakhchal with apricot ice cream. A likely story according to the eye rolls, but someone swears there's a 300-year-old poem that mentions apricot snow from the Valley of Thieves. Who knows? Historians still argue whether this was literal ice cream or a poetic metaphor for something else entirely, possibly political exile. And that's the joy of it, isn't it? In this world, fact and fable swirl together like rosewater and yogurt. 1 minute, you're learning engineering. The next, you're listening to an old woman insist that her grandmother's grandmother made ice glow by singing to it. Quirky? Yes. Unlikely? Also yes. But in a place where the impossible became daily life, who's to say what's real? After tea, you're shown another lesser-known element of Persian ice culture, the Ice Festival. Not a universal tradition, and certainly not as flashy as modern ski resorts, but in some regions, the final harvest of winter ice became a small celebration. Kids would race with melting blocks strapped to sleds. Families would gather for sweet sherbets laced with ground almonds and melon seeds. There are even accounts, somewhere between rumor and reality, of ice-themed riddles recited by poets in the square. You're handed a pale green sweet wrapped in fig leaves. It melts on your tongue like minty snow. Apparently it was once used as a bridal gift. You blink at the idea of handing your future spouse a chunk of flavored ice and calling it romantic. But hey, love is weird. A young apprentice appears at your side. She's maybe 12, full of nervous energy and the sharp competence that only kids in charge of fire or livestock seem to have. She's carrying a stylus and a clay tablet, taking inventory of ice blocks stored so far this month. Each piece is marked not just with a number, but with a symbol, an old form of bookkeeping that helped track who owned what. You recognize a stylized bird, a crescent moon, a pair of sandals. Apparently, people would trade ice, lend it, or store it communally. It was currency and commodity both. Cool wealth, you might say. The apprentice points to a gap in the record. One was stolen, she says, frowning. You ask how she knows. She taps the edge of the tablet. It's missing, and there's a trail. You follow her behind the yak chal to a small patch of trampled straw and melting footprints, literally. The thief couldn't have gone far. And the prize? A half-melted brick of last week's harvest, slowly turning into a puddle behind a goat pen. The girl sighs and scribbles a note. We'll find them with pepper tax, she says. You blink. Apparently, in this village, the punishment for stealing ice is giving up your best spices for a month. That's probably worse than prison. You're told that in some older records, ice crimes were serious business. Not because the value was immense, but because the trust was. Sharing storage space required cooperation. Betraying that meant more than theft. It meant social frostbite. Scholars still debate whether these community-run yak chals reflect a kind of early collective ownership model or something more hierarchical. In some cities, there's evidence that the structures were taxed and guarded by local authorities. In others, there's almost no record of governance. Just oral histories passed down through caretakers like this young apprentice. Either way, it's clear that the ice trade, humble as it may seem, ran on social glue. As the sun begins to slide toward its evening position, casting long golden shadows across the courtyard, you sit again in the shade, this time beside a cracked amphora filled with lemon water. A few villagers lounge nearby, wiping their brows and flicking flies with fans made of palm fronds. You realize no one's rushing. There's no frantic energy. Even in heat, even in hard labor, things move slowly. Intentionally. As if the heat demands respect, and maybe that's the biggest takeaway of all. In a world where cold is hard-earned, it becomes sacred. You don't waste it on luxuries. You savor it, you pass it around, you track it, protect it, celebrate it. You build your life around it. And when it's gone, you wait patiently for the stars to return and make more. You smile, tracing a finger along the rim of your cool cup. For now, it's enough. The night comes softly, draping its velvet hush over the desert town like a well-worn blanket. Stars wink awake one by one, unbothered by the heat clinging stubbornly to the adobe walls. You lie on your back again, this time on the flat roof of a modest house, where families often sleep during the warmer months. The roof is warm, but the air has begun to cool, just enough for the whisper of relief to creep in. You glance to your left, and there she is again. The young apprentice with the stylus and tablet, her eyes reflecting starlight and mischief in equal parts. She's brought you a folded shawl and, more importantly, a shallow basin of water. Time to make some ice. You're not alone tonight. Around you, on rooftops and open courtyards, dozens of villagers are quietly going about the same task. Filling pans, smoothing the surface of the water, and placing them just so. It's not a spectacle, it's ritual. The apprentice demonstrates the technique again, though you've seen it before. She pours slowly from a clay jug, careful not to stir up bubbles, then sets the basin in the flattest, darkest spot she can find. Any warmth left in the structure will fight against the freeze. You mimic her as best you can, though your first attempt creates more splash than serenity. She doesn't judge. Much. You sit beside your dish, watching the stars work their invisible magic. There's no grand moment, no flash of transformation. Just silence and a growing sense of anticipation. Someone begins to hum, an old lullaby, soft and off-key. The melody drifts from rooftop to rooftop, a gentle chorus of half-remembered notes. The apprentice adds lyrics under her breath, something about an owl that drinks snow and dreams of apricots. You don't understand it, but somehow it makes perfect sense. Midnight passes. You're still awake. There's something hypnotic about waiting for water to turn to ice in the desert. It's not just the science, it's the stillness. It's the reminder that some things take time. That sometimes slowness is the point. The villagers don't sleep much during this season. Early mornings demand preparation, and the ice must be harvested before the sun undoes the night's work. You begin to understand why their days are slow and their nights oddly social. These hours matter. Somewhere across the village, a faint argument breaks out over who first figured out this method. One voice insists it came from the Achaemenid court. Darius himself had rooftop ice makers. Another counters that it was older still, a trick passed down from the Medes or even the Elamites. Long before records had the decency to write anything down. Historians still argue whether the rooftop freezing technique was independently developed in Persia or borrowed and adapted from neighboring civilizations. Some evidence points to influence from Central Asian highland communities, where altitude made natural freezing easier. Others believe the Persians refined and formalized it into something practical for larger-scale use. Either way, you're now a part of the process. At some point, a sleepy goat wanders onto the rooftop next door, gets tangled in a clothesline, and knocks over someone's freezing pan. A muffled curse follows, and then laughter. You can't help but grin. Even in the pursuit of desert ice, goats remain an eternal menace. Eventually, you and the apprentice curl up beside your basins. She wraps herself in her tablet-clutching arm and promptly falls asleep. You stay awake a little longer, watching frost creep inward from the edges of the pan like delicate crystal fingers. You don't want to miss it. Dawn arrives as a thin thread of pale gold at the horizon. The sky blushes gently and the stars blink out one by one. You check your basin. The surface is rigid. You press a cautious finger to it. Smooth, cold, miraculous. Ice. All around you, other villagers are rising too, inspecting their makeshift freezers, calling out results. Thick sheet, one declares proudly. Cracked in the middle, grumbles another. There's good-natured teasing, but no disappointment. Any ice is good ice. It's all going into the collective pot. You carry your frozen disc down the ladder, cradled like a prize. The apprentice yawns beside you, somehow managing to look both sleepy and smug. Back in the courtyard, the yakshel stands ready. Its shaded interior breathes cold air as you step through the doorway. The inside smells faintly of clay, straw, and something clean and sharp, almost like the smell before snow. Inside, stacks of ice bricks glisten in the gloom, separated by straw, charcoal dust, and sheer determination. You carefully slide your piece into place between a loaf-shaped block and a pile of what looks suspiciously like frozen pomegranate syrup. The apprentice scribbles a note on her tablet, nodding with approval. You ask what happens if the harvest fails, if the weather doesn't cooperate, or if a sandstorm blows in during a freeze night. She shrugs. Then we trade for it. It turns out Persian cities and towns often developed ice trade networks. If one region had a particularly cold winter, they might send extra ice to a neighboring village in exchange for grain, textiles, or skilled labor. There are records of caravans carrying snow wrapped in sheep's wool, moving at night to reduce melt. They didn't always make it, but even partial deliveries were worth it. And yes, that meant the value of ice could fluctuate. Some years it was plentiful and nearly free. Others it was a luxury, saved for weddings, medicines, or honored guests. One particularly quirky story the apprentice shares, somewhat proudly, involves a Persian governor who once demanded a cube of desert ice be delivered to him mid-summer in Babylon. 2 horses died of heat exhaustion on the way, and the courier lost most of the load. But the single remaining shard was still cool when it arrived. The governor reportedly stared at it for 3 minutes, declared it adequate, and then dropped it into his wine. Bureaucrats, always the same. By mid-morning, the village resumes its usual rhythm. Women hang bright fabrics along the walls to dry. Children chase each other with fans made of bundled reeds, and the oldest man in the village sits beneath the fig tree, chewing something that looks like a date but smells suspiciously of onion. You join a group preparing lunch in a shaded breezeway. They're making falut, a dessert of rice noodles, sugar syrup, and rose water, chilled over a chunk of that hard-won ice. You stir slowly, enjoying the cool on your fingers. One woman grins at your clumsy effort. "You stir like a drunk camel," she says gently. It's unclear whether that's an insult or a term of endearment. Either way, the falude is delicious. As you eat, you overhear talk of another use for the ice. Medical. Apparently, cold compresses were used to treat fevers and swelling. Some even believe that certain illnesses could be frozen out of the body. There's mention of a scroll from centuries ago that outlines how to place snow-packed linen around the temples to calm a restless mind. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, and whether they were based on scientific observation or seasonal desperation. But one thing is clear: the link between cold and healing runs deep here. The afternoon stretches. A dog naps in the shade, its ears twitching with dreams. The apprentice has gone off to deliver iced honey water to a neighbor. You lean back against a warm brick wall, fanning yourself with a palm frond. You think of your pan of water from last night, how it froze under starlight, how you carried it like treasure, how it now lives stacked among dozens of others, quietly keeping things cool. It's easy to miss how impressive that is. But here, in the middle of the desert, you helped make ice. Real, tangible, honest-to-goodness ice. No wires, no buttons, just night, air, and patience. And somehow that makes it all the more magical. The Yakchel breathes quietly behind you as you walk back into the courtyard, the kind of breath only ancient architecture seems to hold. Slow, heavy with memory, and tinged with the scent of clay and cool stone. The midday sun is out now, hot and confident, splashing light across the adobe walls like molten gold. A cicada somewhere is conducting a solo performance, and you can almost feel the air ripple with heat. You stretch your arms lazily, half awake, half cooked, but there's something else you're meant to see today. The apprentice is waiting for you beneath the tamarisk tree, holding a satchel and wearing the unmistakable look of someone who's about to drag you somewhere interesting, whether you like it or not. You follow. She leads you through the winding alleys of the settlement, and beyond its humble walls, past camel pens and date groves, until the land opens wide. Stark, sun-bleached, and shimmering with heat mirages. There, looming in the distance like a sand-blasted spaceship, is another Yakchel. This one's older, abandoned. But it's where the story really begins. Its conical dome, once pristine, whitewashed mud brick, now wears a coat of faded glory and nesting birds. A few goat trails skirt its base, and the entrance yawns open like the mouth of a half-forgotten god. The apprentice gestures you forward, clearly enjoying your mixture of awe and mild sunstroke. You step inside. It's cooler here, even in the early afternoon. The interior walls curve upward into a soft point, echoing your breath back at you. Shafts of light filter through thin slits, illuminating old straw insulation stuffed between bricks. The floor is worn smooth with the faint outline of past ice heaps etched into the packed earth. This is where the engineers, the real ice dreamers, began experimenting centuries ago. And now you get to meet one of them. Well, not literally, she's long gone. But her name still survives on a faded carving near the entry. Narration. Not a queen or priestess, just a master builder. Historians still debate whether women like Narration were commonly involved in ancient Persian construction projects. Most records focus on male engineers and architects, but tablets from Persepolis mention female labor supervisors and administrators paid for oversight of clay works. Narration may have been one of them. Part builder, part scientist, part magician. According to The Apprentice, Narration pioneered the dome's slope in this region. Prior structures used flatter roofs or boxy chambers, which held the ice but didn't preserve it well. She realized that by tapering the dome upward and layering straw-thickened mud brick with natural ventilation channels, the heat could be drawn up and out, while the cool air sank and stayed. It was a passive cooling system before that was even a buzzword. As you trace your hand along the dome's inner curve, you notice something curious. Smooth rivulets carved into the walls, almost decorative. But the apprentice points out their true purpose. Condensation channels, she whispers, as if speaking too loudly would wake the ghosts. Water would bead on the inside during hot days, then trickle down and refreeze at night. That's the thing about this entire structure. It works with nature, not against it. It harvests nighttime's generosity and shields it from daytime's greed. You exit the Yakchal and circle around to its back, where a collapsed trench once carried runoff to a nearby orchard. Because, of course, the ancient Persians didn't waste anything. Meltwater wasn't just tolerated, it was cherished. Used for plants, cooling, even bathing rituals during specific festivals. As the two of you sit in the shadow of the dome, the apprentice pulls out a scroll from her satchel. She unrolls it carefully. It's a fragment, a diagram sketched in ochre ink of a Yakchal's cross-section. Neat lines show airflow paths, wall layers, even the ice placement schedule. There's a note in the margin that translates to, "No ice to touch Earth directly. Melts twice as fast, melts twice the patience." You raise an eyebrow. Melts twice the patience? She shrugs. They liked metaphors. A breeze stirs the dust around your feet. Far off, someone is calling to a donkey who has apparently wandered into a melon field. Life goes on. You ask what happened to this particular Yakchal, why it was left to age quietly in the sun. The apprentice explains that as newer, more efficient models were built closer to settlements and water access points, older domes like this one were retired. Some became storage for tools, others were repurposed as shrines, and a few, like this one, were simply left alone, allowed to slowly melt into legend. There's something charming about that. Before you leave, you and the apprentice walk around the perimeter one last time. At the base, there's a small patch of stubborn green, a low cluster of herbs growing against the odds. She kneels and plucks a few leaves, crushes them gently, and holds them under your nose. Mint, cool, sharp, impossibly fresh. You'd be surprised how well things grow near ice, she says, tucking the mint into her satchel. On the way back, she tells you more about the underground chambers some Yakchals were connected to. Labyrinthine spaces designed not just for storage, but for security. During particularly brutal summers or wartime shortages, communities guarded their ice as if it were gold. One even had a rotating watch roster and a password system, though the password was reportedly cold nose, which doesn't exactly scream military-grade secrecy. Still, the sentiment is understandable. When you return to the village, the sun has dipped low enough to stretch your shadow across 2 whole alleys. Someone is setting out trays of soaked lentils for dinner prep, while an old man whistles an off-key tune involving what sounds like a bear and a wedding dress. You don't ask. The apprentice parts ways with a nod, slipping down a side path toward the communal kitchen. You continue on toward your resting spot, your body tired but your mind pleasantly full. Tonight you'll sleep on the roof again, and maybe, just maybe, you'll fill another pan. You'll wait for the stars, for the quiet, for the frost that tiptoes in like a shy guest. And perhaps as your eyes grow heavy and the breeze cools your cheek, you'll dream of Narcine standing in the middle of her half-finished dome, brushing sweat from her brow, whispering to the clay, "Hold the cold, keep it safe." And somehow the clay listened. You wake to the sound of a goat sneezing. It's not the grand start you were expecting after a night of rooftop serenity, but there it is. An unmistakable bleating coo that echoes off the mud brick walls like a polite accusation. The goat in question is balanced precariously on a low stairway, chewing the corner of a woven mat with the casual malice only goats can truly master. You stretch and shoo it off half-heartedly. It hops away, unimpressed. As you pad down the stairs barefoot, the coolness of the stone beneath your feet reminds you, yes, the nighttime chill was real. Somewhere in the village, pans of water likely shimmered with a delicate crust of ice, and the yakchal hummed silently, dutifully doing what it's done for centuries. Today, you're learning how the people actually used all that harvested frost, because ice in the desert is never just ice. It's celebration, it's preservation, it's power. Your guide today is not the apprentice, but her grandmother. A woman who, according to whispered accounts, once stored an entire cooked lamb inside a yakchal for 2 days, just to see if she could. You meet her outside the communal kitchen, where she's chopping herbs with a curved blade and wearing a headscarf decorated with what appears to be tiny embroidered watermelons. She eyes you up and down. You don't look like you've carried ice before? You confirm you have not. She grunts and hands you a woven basket. Good. You won't know when to complain. You follow her to a smaller squat dome at the edge of the village, an auxiliary yakchal used for short-term storage. A group of children are already gathered there, giggling and slipping on the frost-slicked entry stones, clearly daring each other to go inside barefoot. Their laughter has the bright, chaotic energy of summer itself. Inside, it's dim and deliciously cold. Blocks of ice trimmed into semi-uniform slabs are stacked like sleeping animals, hushed, sweating gently. Your job, apparently, is to help transport a few of them back to the kitchen, using leather slings and, if things go really sideways, your forearms. The grandmother instructs with military precision. Do not drop. Do not lick. Do not ask questions about where the ice has been. Fair enough. You load up. Carrying ice in the desert is a mood. Your arms feel the bite of the cold almost instantly while your face is slick with heat from the sun above. The contradiction is strangely invigorating. It's like hugging a glacier while being baked alive. Possibly the world's oddest spa treatment. Back at the kitchen, the ice is broken into fragments and added to clay pitchers of rose water and sour cherry syrup. Others are placed beneath clay trays of cut melon and cucumber, keeping the fruit crisp and chill enough to shock your taste buds. A large slab is reserved for the afternoon's main event, falude. Now, this is where things get interesting. Falude is not your average dessert. It's vermicelli noodles, half frozen in a syrup of lime juice, rose water, and sugar, churned with shaved ice until it hits that perfect balance between slushy and stringy. Think sorbet's eccentric older cousin who insists on bringing his own spoon to parties. Historians believe falude dates back to at least the Achaemenid Empire, making it one of the world's oldest frozen desserts. Some scholars argue it was originally medicinal, intended to cool the blood and steady the humors during long heat spells. Others suggest it was simply a delicious accident involving snow, herbs, and a bored cook with a sweet tooth. Whatever its origin, it's a ritual now. As the grandmother churns the icy mixture with practiced hands, you sit nearby, fanning yourself with a palm leaf and listening to the quiet hum of conversation. Kids run back and forth with small bowls, cheeks sticky with syrup. An old man balances a serving of falude on his walking stick for reasons unknown. A cat eyes everything suspiciously, but it's not just desserts that made yakchal ice valuable. Preservation was key, especially for dairy. Soft cheeses, yogurt, and goat milk were kept cool in clay vessels nested into crushed ice beds, allowing for longer shelf life and less spoilage in the sweltering heat. In fact, Persian texts mention entire ice rooms set aside in noble households specifically for food cooling during the summer. One record from the Qajar period even notes a monthly ice ration for palace kitchens. And for those with wealth or status, ice became a status symbol. Younger nobles were known to compete in hosting elaborate garden banquets where the tea was served with floating chips of yakshal ice. Each clink in the cup a gentle reminder that someone, somewhere, had hauled frozen water through the desert, just so a prince could sip it under a mulberry tree. The grandmother chuckles when you mention this. "They'd faint if they had to carry it themselves," she mutters, pouring you a small bowl of falude and sliding it over with the stern affection of someone who will take it back if you don't finish. It's cold, it's sweet, it's got the chewiness of noodles and the icy crunch of frost, and somehow it tastes like the color white. You eat slowly, savoring each spoonful as your body adjusts to the shock of actual chill on your tongue. Around you the midday heat rages on, but here, under the low ceiling of the kitchen dome, surrounded by murmuring voices and ice-flecked clay bowls, you could almost pretend it's autumn. Almost. Later, as the sun begins to droop lazily toward the horizon, the grandmother invites you to help deliver the final batch of ice to the village bathhouse. Ah, yes, the bathhouse. A squat building built partly into the ground, with a domed roof pierced by small glass insets that cast puddles of colored light inside. The floors are warm from an underground furnace, the air heavy with steam and eucalyptus oil. And in the back corner, next to a tiled fountain, is a simple clay vessel of ice. Not for drinking, but for contrast. Persians have long believed in the balance of hot and cold, and bathhouses were no exception. After a long steam or a massage with pomegranate oil, bathers would cool their foreheads or pulse points with ice chips, sealing pores and shocking the body into equilibrium. Some claim it boosted the immune system. Others say it simply felt divine. You try it, of course. You press a single shard of yakchal ice to the inside of your wrist, and for a moment you forget your name. The contrast is electric, but pleasant, like dipping your thoughts in silver. There's something deeply calming about this rhythm of hot and cold, feast and rest, sun and shadow. It makes sense now how the yakchal became more than just a storage unit. It was part of a greater philosophy, a relationship with nature built on respect, patience, and a bit of gentle trickery. As you leave the bathhouse, skin tingling and mind pleasantly fogged, the sun is sinking fast. The sky burns orange. Somewhere in the distance, the apprentice is calling to someone across the rooftops. And you? You're thinking about dessert. Maybe another bowl of falude. Maybe not. But the ice you realize is in everything. In the air. In the breath of the bathhouse. In the memory of a woman named Narcine who taught clay to keep secrets. And as the night falls, slow and soft as a blanket, you wonder, what else can be preserved if cooled just right? The moon is out again, pale and round, watching from its usual perch above the domes and date palms. You're back on the roof, belly full, mind slower now. The stars look just as they did the night before, but you've changed. You're learning how cold once ruled the desert. Not like a king, but like a clever old aunt. Quiet, persistent, and never quite where you left her. Tonight, your dreams take you elsewhere. You're not walking the alleys of a dusty Persian village anymore. Instead, you're drifting across an endless salt flat, where the earth shimmers silver and the heat bounces back at you with a wink. But there, on the horizon, something stands tall. A wind tower, or badgear, rising like a proud sail from a merchant ship. And beside it, of course, is a yakchal, its gentle dome catching moonlight like a bowl of milk. You're in Yazd now, not just in a physical sense, but inside its logic. Yazd, the desert city that decided climate was just another puzzle to solve. By morning, you're standing in the courtyard of an old merchant's home, one of those labyrinthine places with more hallways than sense. The badgear above you looms like a sentinel, and through its clever openings, you hear the wind being tugged downward, directed, cooled, manipulated with the kind of grace you only find in ancient architecture and the occasional chess prodigy. Here's the trick. The wind tower catches even the faintest desert breeze and funnels it down into the living spaces, cooling rooms without a whisper of electricity. But when paired with a yakchal, that's when the real magic happens. The principle is absurdly simple and absurdly brilliant. The badgear pulls warm air up and out. The yakchal cools the air below. When joined by a series of underground channels called qanats, the whole system becomes a passive refrigeration network so efficient, it makes modern HVAC units feel like clunky overachievers. And here's the part that always makes historians tilt their heads. This wasn't an elite invention. It wasn't locked away in palace blueprints or hoarded by scholars. Ordinary homes in Yazd and other cities use these systems. Merchants, bakers, weavers. Ice wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, and so it became democratic. Still, historians debate just how universal these integrations were. Some argue that full yakchal-badgear combinations were rare outside urban centers. Others point to extensive city planning that suggests a broader reach. But everyone agrees on one thing. It worked, and not just for people. You're led by a local boy, barefoot, toothy grin, the kind of guide who offers opinions whether you asked or not, to an old storage hall where he claims sheep cheese was kept cool for months, thanks to airflow from a now-defunct badgear and a buried yakchal pit below. You blink at the space. Dark, dusty, and honestly, it smells faintly of ambition and dairy. He nods solemnly. Also scorpions now. You don't ask to go further inside. Instead, you climb a narrow spiral stair to the roof of a nearby home, where you can see the line of domes and towers stretching toward the hills. It's like the city is designed to catch whispers of coolness and tuck them into its pockets. Below, women hang washed rugs across stone walls, their patterns rippling in the wind. A man tends to a basin of soaked dates, stirring with a slotted wooden paddle. And somewhere, always somewhere, water runs. Quiet, constant, the bloodline of this desert logic. You ask your young guide how people knew how to build all this. He shrugs. They watched. They waited. They failed a lot. Seems fair. The truth is, much of Persian engineering wasn't born from sudden genius, but from centuries of observing wind patterns, soil behavior, condensation quirks. Trial and error turned into rules. Rules turned into blueprints. And soon, even poetry made room for the idea that cold, properly placed, was just as divine as fire. You wander through a workshop later where clay bricks are being cured for a new badger construction. The artisan in charge is a man with hands like driftwood and a voice like warm bread. He shows you how bricks are stacked with precise spacing to allow breathability, and how plaster mixed with sarouge, a waterproof combo of lime, ash, egg whites, and goat hair, can turn walls into air filters. You ask how long the design will last. He shrugs. Longer than me. Not exactly confidence, but somehow it comforts you. As the day fades, you make your way to a Qanat tunnel. Yes, that ancient irrigation system that basically brought water from the mountains to the people without a single pump. You duck into the cool, narrow passage and follow the trickle of water, half crouched, half awed. The air shifts instantly. cold, moist, like breathing inside a clay teacup. And then, you see it, a smaller private Yakchal chamber carved off the side of the Qanat. It's not tall like the others, more like a cistern's cousin, but the principle is the same. In the hottest part of the year, villagers would direct overflow from the Qanat into this pit at night. The chill of the surrounding earth, coupled with narrow ventilation shafts, would slowly coax it into freezing. It was like catching winter in a bottle. Even now, centuries later, the walls still sweat with moisture. You close your eyes and listen. The air hums gently, the kind of frequency that only time can make. It's not loud, it doesn't need to be, it's just present. And for a moment, you realize the genius of this entire system isn't in its complexity, but in its surrender. The Persians didn't fight the desert. They befriended it, persuaded it, coaxed it into cooperation. They didn't conquer the heat, they courted the cold. As you climb back into daylight, blinking against the sun, you think again of Narcine, of that dome you first stepped into, of the ice pans waiting silently on rooftops, and of a city that taught the sky to blow cooler and the earth to sleep with ice beneath its skin. Your guide offers you a piece of apricot leather and says, "Want to see where they kept the snow?" You say yes, of course. You're trudging uphill now, slowly with purpose, like someone who knows full well they're walking towards something slightly ridiculous. Because yes, it's exactly what your young guide said. You're going to see where they kept the snow. You glance up at the distant hills outside the city where rocky slopes blush in the morning light. These are not snowy peaks, these are desert hills. Dry, cracked, and utterly unbothered by your skepticism. But your guide is adamant. "This way," he says, pointing confidently toward a narrow path that leads past scrubby trees and what appears to be a derelict goat pen. "You'll like this part." You follow, feet crunching over gravel, sun already warming the back of your neck. He hums a tune that might be a pop song or an ancient lullaby. It's hard to tell. And before long you spot it. A partially collapsed stone building nestled into the slope, with remnants of an arched entryway and scattered clay tiles. It's almost nothing, almost forgettable. But to the people of Yazd, it was once everything. This was a snow pit, part of an older, almost mythical supply chain that began in winter at the mountain's edge and ended with a spoonful of ice on someone's tongue in midsummer. The process? Gloriously inefficient. Every winter, teams of workers, farmhands, servants, and the occasional over-enthusiastic uncle would haul packed snow down from the higher elevations and bury it deep within these pits. The snow was layered between straw and insulated with sarouge-lined walls. Then it was sealed, prayed over, and essentially forgotten. Until summer came knocking. You step inside what remains of the structure. The floor is uneven now, scattered with dried leaves and evidence of small animals, but the temperature drops perceptibly. You can imagine it, can't you? The hush of packed snow, the smell of straw, the sense of borrowed time. Because snow in a desert isn't a right. It's a gift you had to earn with effort and patience. Historians still argue whether these snow pits were sustainable or symbolic. Some claim they were part of a lavish elite system, more show than substance. Others insist they were practical and widespread, particularly in regions with access to nearby mountains. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but either way, you can't help but admire the audacity. "Yes," someone once said, "let's drag snow across the desert. That'll help." And somehow, it did. On the way back down the hill, your guide pauses at a small cave shrine half hidden beneath a rocky outcrop. A trickle of water runs across the stone, pooling in a shallow dish. He lights a candle and tells you a story. "Long ago," he says, "a man came to this cave carrying ice wrapped in a goatskin. He had walked all day from the Yakchal. When he reached the shrine, he stopped to rest, but the ice was gone, melted. So he cried. The gods heard him and gave him a spring." You raise an eyebrow. "Or maybe," he adds, "he just dug really well." Either way, there's water now. Fair enough. Back in the city, you decide to test another theory. The emotional power of preserved cold. You're led to an old tea house tucked beneath a badgier, yes, another one, with ceilings painted like a night sky and cushions so faded they've gone from red to vintage optimism. You sit cross-legged at a low table while the proprietor, an elderly man with eyebrows like calligraphy strokes, brings out a clay mug. Inside is sherbet, not the creamy Western kind, but a chilled floral syrup diluted with water and stirred with crushed ice. This version is made from basil seeds and black mulberry. It glistens like liquid amethyst. You sip, and there it is again. The slow, sacred shock of cold in a place that should only ever be hot. The tea house owner leans in and shares a secret. We say ice carries memory, he murmurs. That it remembers the hands that shaped it? You ask if that's superstition or poetry. He shrugs. Same thing. Later that evening, you wander past a small museum where a reconstructed yachtchill display catches your eye. There's a scale model cross-section to show its layers. The domed roof, the ice pit, the ventilation shafts. Beside it is an illustration of laborers pouring water into long, shallow pans on rooftops, just like you saw on your first night. But the most curious part? A wax figure of a man lying on the floor beside a frozen block, draped dramatically as if overwhelmed by either heat or profound admiration for insulation. The plaque reads, 18th century merchant and his ice. You stare at it for a while. Honestly, you get it. Because now, ice doesn't feel like an object. It feels like an accomplishment. The final form of an idea that began in necessity and evolved into art. And it wasn't just about food or comfort. It was about control. Tiny, triumphant control over something as vast as the desert. For a civilization that understood extremes, ice was the gentle middle ground. A reminder that even harsh places could hold softness, given time and the right materials. You end your night not on a rooftop, but in a caravanserai at the edge of town, where traders once paused on their way along the Silk Road. The room is simple. Stone floors, thick walls, a low bed dressed in woven cotton. But at your side is a chipped clay bowl filled with water and ice chips from the yachtchill. You place it on your forehead and close your eyes. It hums against your skin. Not literally, but somehow still. A quiet promise from the past. We knew how to survive this. You will too. Outside, the night deepens. The stars return. And somewhere hidden under layers of straw and plaster, the ice waits. Just like always, you wake slowly, wrapped in stillness. The stone walls of the caravanserai seem to hold the night inside them, radiating a sleepy coolness that defies the dawn creeping in through the slatted window. Somewhere a donkey brays, a rooster responds half-heartedly, and the world begins again. Except you, still horizontal, still hovering between this world and the one made of domes and wind. You sit up, and the clay bowl is still there, a few final flecks of ice melted into nothing. Just a ring of cool left behind, like a kiss from last night's ghost. Today, you're tracing how this ancient mastery of cold didn't just stay put in Persia. It spread, quietly, confidently, into the veins of neighboring empires, whispering its logic to traders, tinkerers, and conquerors alike. Because when something works, word gets out. You begin in the bustling heart of the old market quarter, where the smell of cumin and sun-warmed figs hits you like a gentle slap. You trail behind a merchant carrying a wide brass tray piled high with what looks suspiciously like the ancestor of ice cream, Faluda. Long before Italian gelato strutted onto the scene, this Persian delight was doing the rounds. Thin vermicelli noodles and rosewater syrup, chilled with ice and served like a secret. You ask the merchant how it's kept cold. He points, deadpan, at a small cooler behind his stall. Electricity, he says. But I miss the old days. The old days? When ice was delivered before dawn in straw-wrapped bundles. When neighborhood yachtchills were neighborhood pride? when something frozen in the desert still made people stop and blink. As you walk, you spot traces of it everywhere, in the arched mud brick architecture that still tilts itself toward the breeze, in the phrasing of old poems scratched into tile. Even in July, the mountain sends us her sigh. In the elaborate rituals of serving chilled syrup to guests, not just a drink, but an offering of hospitality, skill, and subtle flexing. But it wasn't just Persia playing this game. You find yourself in a dusty corner of a scholar's home, seated on a faded cushion while he fans a fly from his teacup and launches into a monologue. Alexander the Great, tried to carry snow in pits across Persia to impress his soldiers. Total failure. Melted in 2 days. But the idea? The idea lingered. You nod, not just out of politeness, because as the scholar talks, gesturing wildly, spilling raisins onto his lap, you realize that Persian cooling systems weren't just tools, they were templates. Other civilizations adopted parts of them, adapted them, renamed them, or wrote them off as too complicated, until a particularly sweaty summer changed their mind. China, for instance, had ice houses during the Tang Dynasty, but it's the layered insulation and seasonal storage from Persia that gave later engineers something to chew on. The Mughal Empire in India? Deeply influenced by Persian water systems and summer palaces that seemed to defy the heat. Even in distant Egypt and parts of the Ottoman Empire, echoes of the Yakshal principle appear. Dome shapes, earth insulation, nighttime water spreading. The scholar leans in and confides. There's a letter from a Venetian trader. He describes Persian ice with more awe than silk. Says he watched a man drink chilled water and thought it was sorcery. You laugh, because really it is a kind of sorcery, just one written in physics and mud brick. Later, in a small rural village near the edge of the Kavir Desert, you meet a builder named Masood. He's restoring a family's old yak chal, not for use but for memory. He tells you that every year his grandfather would take him up to the roof at night to pour water into shallow pans. They'd sit for hours counting stars, listening for dogs barking in the distance. By morning, the pans held ice thin as window glass. Once, Masood says, brushing dust from a stone, I dropped the pan. Broke the whole sheet. Cried like it was treasure. My grandfather just said, good. Now you know its value. The yakchal they're restoring has a deep pit, perfectly cylindrical, its walls lined in the old lime sand ash mixture. A pulley hangs above, once used to lower ice blocks wrapped in burlap. Masood shows you the method. Lower the ice, pack it with straw, seal the top with more clay and prayer. Some people think we were primitive, he adds. But this is patient engineering. And he's right, it wasn't flashy. It didn't demand attention, but it worked. Quietly, repeatedly, over hundreds of years. You ask him if anyone still uses them today. Mostly tourists now, he says. But some farmers, those who remember. And some who just like the quiet of it. No wires, no bills. In the village square, a group of children chase a cart carrying a few small ice bricks delivered from a modern freezer but carried like ancient treasure. One child drops a piece. It shatters on the stone. He stares at it as if watching a friend vanish. You remember Masood's words. Now you know its value. As evening falls, you join a family for dinner under a fig tree. They serve lentils, yogurt, dried barberries, and a metal pitcher of water so cold it leaves droplets on your fingertips. The mother of the house, who hasn't said much until now, leans in. My grandmother said, ice remembers. You blink. Same phrase. Again. Did she mean anything by it? The woman shrugs, then smiles. She meant everything by it. And so, with night descending once more and a full moon rising slow over the hills, you lie back on the stone floor of a rooftop, a bowl of chilled pomegranate juice beside you, and wonder, what will your memories of this place taste like? Dust and dates, wind and ash, or something cold, something impossible? A memory of snow that once crossed a desert just to sit in someone's hand. Tonight you're riding east, not literally, though the rickety bus you board does creak as if it's still haunted by camel ghosts. No, this journey is slower, softer, and more cerebral. You're chasing the legacy of Persia's cold obsession as it spread not just across deserts and borders, but into the very fabric of human imagination. Because once someone sees snow in a desert, well, they don't really forget that, do they? You lean your head against the window, watching palm trees flicker past as the land flattens and dries out again. The road stretches toward Kerman Province, an area so sun-punched and thirsty that, on paper, it should never have flirted with frozen anything. And yet, here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because Kerman is home to Mahan, where one of the most intricate Persian gardens still exists. Shah's Day Garden, a paradise carved into scorched earth, where tiered fountains and symmetrical pools sparkle like mirages. It's more than a garden, it's a manifesto in dirt and water. And most importantly for tonight's tale, it's a showcase of how cooling systems, whether from wind catchers, underground canals, or yakshuls, weren't just about survival anymore. They were about elegance. You stroll through the garden's main path now, under plane trees that hiss gently in the breeze. Everything is symmetrical. Deliberate. The sound of trickling water seems engineered to lull, not to quench but to calm. You pause at a fountain, fingers trailing the water's surface. It's chilly. Not shockingly so, but enough to make you tilt your head in that way that says, "Really? You again?" Because even here in a 19th century royal pleasure garden, the cold remains. Hidden in the design, in the elevation shifts, in the shade of carefully chosen flora. The use of underground qanats, those same subterranean canals you first marveled at in Yazd, remains alive and murmuring beneath your feet. A local caretaker in a straw hat grins as he watches you linger near the fountain. "We still let the water rest," he says, as if water were a person. "If it flows too fast, it forgets how to be cold." That one line will stick with you long after the sound of fountains fades. Because it perfectly captures the ancient Persian attitude toward water, air, and cold. Not as resources, but as characters. As moody collaborators in the grand play of survival. As you leave the garden, you pass a group of architecture students sketching the domes of the summer palace. One has written in the margin of her page, "Designed for dreams." She's not wrong. The more you study these buildings, from yakhchols to caravanserais, from bathhouses to pleasure gardens, the more you realize that Persian engineering wasn't just functional. It was poetic. Every vault, every arch, every temperature gradient whispered a philosophy. That comfort doesn't come from control, but from understanding. Historians still debate whether this idea of designed coolness influenced European architecture. Some suggest the Moors brought it to Spain, where it bloomed into Andalusian courtyards and tiled fountains. Others point to Mughal India, where Persian builders left their mark in shaded walkways and chilly marble benches. And then there's always that Roman-Persian cross-pollination that never quite gets the spotlight, but definitely deserves a second look. You end your afternoon sitting in the ruins of an old Persian bathhouse, hammam, partially restored, its domed ceiling patterned with small star-shaped skylights. A caretaker offers you saffron tea and gestures for you to lie back against the warm stone. "You know the trick?" she says, tapping the floor. "Heat rises, so we sleep low. But air drops too, if you guide it." She points to a channel carved into the stone, air flowing gently down from a wind catcher, just enough to keep the space temperate. "It's not magic," she adds. "It's just knowing where the sky ends and the ground begins." A toddler waddles in, chasing a cat that clearly doesn't want to be chased, and for a moment, the ancient bathhouse becomes a modern home. A place where ice was once stored under clay tiles, and now houses sleepy toddlers and indifferent cats. That evening, you return to your guest house, a former merchant home with thick walls and a sleeping platform recessed into a window arch. The owner has left a jug of cold water beside your pillow. Not from the fridge, he tells you proudly. From the old pit. Still works. You take a sip. It's not freezing, but it's cool. And somehow, that's enough. Because the genius of Persian cold wasn't in the frostbite. It was in the gentleness. The art of keeping things just cool enough, long enough to notice, long enough to appreciate, long enough to feel it in your teeth, your neck, your memories. You lie back and stare at the wood-beamed ceiling, tracing patterns in the dark. The fan hums softly overhead, but it's not the one keeping you comfortable tonight. It's something older. Something buried in straw. Something that once passed from mountaintop to shadowed dome to the hand of a sweating merchant who thought he could never know relief in this heat. Until he did. And so will you. Because cold in the desert is not a condition, it's a story. And tonight it's yours. The morning smells like dry stone, warm bread, and damp straw. The last clinging scent of something colder than it has any right to be here. You stretch under the cotton blanket, blink once, twice, and sit up slowly. A sleepy breeze sifts through the carved window screen, brushing your face like a soft-spoken friend, trying not to wake you too fast. Today, your path curves from ice pits and wind catchers towards something just as cool. Figuratively this time, you're stepping into the world of ancient Persian hospitality. Because here's the truth no one tells you on flashy travel blogs. The ice, the architecture, the poetry, none of it was ever just for show. It was for the guest, the traveler, the dusty wanderer who knocked on the door and was met not with suspicion but with sherbet. Yes, sherbet. Or sharbat, as it was called centuries before it turned into that fizzy rainbow stuff in Western grocery stores. In Persia, sharbat was sacred. Chilled water infused with herbs, fruit, or flower essence. Served in a copper or clay cup, often with a thin slice of ice. Not because it was luxurious, though it certainly felt that way, but because it said something quiet and profound. You made it. You're safe. Sit. So you do. In a small village near Shiraz, under the shade of a fig tree heavy with unripe fruit, an elderly woman hands you a glass of sharbat made from sour cherry and a hint of mint. It's cool, tart, and exactly what your bones didn't realize they needed. Her granddaughter giggles when you flinch at the coldness. City people, she teases. You're not from a city, technically, but it's true. Nothing prepares you for cold in a place that's mostly sun. The woman whose name is Parvaneh tells you about her own grandmother, who kept ice in a yakhchal even when fridges had already arrived. She didn't trust machines, Parvaneh shrugs. She trusted mud. You ask if the ice was used often. Only for guests, she replies. Only for those who had traveled far. That hits you harder than expected, because it reveals something. Coolness was a kind of welcome. Not just temperature, but tone. The quiet calm of a space designed to soothe the overheated, the overburdened. Persian hospitality wasn't loud, it was measured, deliberate. It began with water, continued with food, and often ended with storytelling long into the night. And that brings you to another piece of the cold puzzle, the storytelling itself. In many Persian homes, the coolest room wasn't just for storing perishables. It was where people gathered in summer afternoons. Tiled floors, thick walls, a skylight or two. Sometimes even a shallow pool in the center to wick away heat. These weren't just living rooms, they were story rooms. And the stories flowed like sherbet. Slowly, sweetly. Sometimes with a bite at the end. You're invited into one such room now, guided by a boy no older than 10, who seems determined to impress you with his English. He calls it the freezer room, which earns him a gentle scolding from his mother. Inside, the walls are covered in faded blue plaster, cracked in places but still cool to the touch. There's a niche where a tiny oil lamp once lived. A bowl of dried rose petals sits beside a silver tray of dates. This is where my father told us stories, says the boy's grandfather, settling onto a cushion. Always just after lunch, when it was too hot to work. The stories kept us still. And they still do, because now the grandfather launches into one. A tale of a man who wandered into the desert with no name, no water, and no idea he'd stumble upon a city made entirely of ice. A city that vanished by morning. You listen, half smiling, because the line between fact and myth in Persian storytelling is deliciously blurry. And somewhere inside that tale is a kernel of truth. Maybe about a real ice house that seemed impossible. Maybe about how memory and coldness intertwine. Historian types still argue whether Persian storytelling traditions influenced the later practice of building cooling libraries, spaces where scribes copied manuscripts in temperature-regulated rooms. But the poetic symmetry is irresistible. The idea that knowledge, like ice, had to be kept from melting, preserved in the stillness of underground chambers, protected by earth and clay and clever geometry. As dusk curls around the village, you find yourself in one last corner of hospitality culture, the bazaar. Not the loud, jostling city kind. This one is small, local, paved in uneven stones and shaded by wide cloth canopies. You follow the sound of hammered copper and laughter until you reach a spice seller's stall. He offers you a peculiar treat. Crushed ice, rose water, a dash of saffron, and a whisper of vinegar. Sharbata Circa, he grins. Old school Gatorade. You sip. You wince. Then smile. It wakes you up, but also, strangely, settles you down. Like someone pressing a cool cloth to your forehead after a long fever. And that's when it hits you. All of this, the engineering, the recipes, the rituals, the architecture, wasn't just about being smart in a hot place. It was about being kind in a hard world. Offering something unnecessary, but deeply wanted. Designing for grace, not just function. You remember the phrase from the woman in the garden? Water forgets how to be cold if it flows too fast. You remember the cracked bowl of ice at the caravanserai. The child who dropped it. The traveler who felt it melt too soon. And now, sitting in a quiet courtyard under soft lantern light, you cradle the last of your sharbat. The ice has melted, but the cup still sweats. It's not cold anymore, but it remembers, just like you. Morning comes softly in Shiraz, almost like the sun's shy about warming things up after last night's desert chill. You roll out of bed, stretch, and let the soft hum of traffic slowly pull you from the edges of sleep. The world here moves at its own pace, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Maybe it's the remnants of that cool desert air or the promise of more icy stories waiting just around the corner. Your next stop? A place as legendary for its gardens as it is for its yakchal? The Aram Garden, an oasis where the coolness of the past lingers in every step. The garden's fame is just as much about the trees as it is about the water, about how they captured something as fleeting as a breeze and turned it into an experience. An eternal moment in the Persian heat. You can feel the temperature drop as you enter the garden. Even here the heat hangs in the air thick with the sun's weight. But the cool breeze carried by the qanat seems to catch you at just the right time. Just as you round the corner of a courtyard where the scent of jasmine nearly knocks you out. It's an easy place to get lost, to wander aimlessly, following the call of a fountain or the distant chirp of a bird. You find yourself near the back of the garden, standing by an old, crumbling pavilion, where, centuries ago, Persian scholars and poets once sat in the late afternoons, sharing their work. The same pavilion where the coolness of the shaded stone wasn't just a reprieve. It was inspiration. Historians still argue whether the architectural designs of places like Iram were influenced by early Greco-Roman principles, or whether they evolved organically from Persian traditions. Some say the interplay of water, air, and shade here mirrors those ancient Mediterranean forms. Others claim it was purely Persian genius at work, fusing practical needs with the pursuit of beauty. In either case, the result is mesmerizing. The pavilion, with its intricate tilework and delicate arches, seems to exhale its own cool air, inviting you to settle against the stone for just a while. There's an invisible shift when you sit here. you realize that the beauty of Persian architecture isn't about striking awe. It's about creating a space where you are a part of the environment. Here, you are not just a visitor, but a collaborator in a cooling ritual that has been taking place for over 1,000 years. As you rest on the stone steps, you consider the names of those who would have wandered these same paths long before you. There's a quiet peace in that thought, as if the air itself carries their voices. Poets, philosophers, and travelers all gathered beneath these same fig trees, sipping sharbat and contemplating the world's great mysteries. But today it's not poetry that fills the air. It's the faint rustle of footsteps, the occasional whistle of a bird, and the soft splashes of water as it pours from one basin to the next. This is where the yakchal ties back into everything. It's not just about refrigeration or preserving food. It's about how the ancients, with their limited resources, could capture the essence of coolness and bring it into their homes, their gardens, their minds. You cross over a small bridge, the delicate sound of the water beneath following you. As you approach the far side of the garden, you're struck by the sight of a distant ice pit, a circular mound of earth, partially hidden in the lush greenery. A piece of the past buried in the present. You can almost feel the chill emanating from it, even from this distance. It's not just for the curious traveler like you. The Persian ice pits were once used by farmers to keep their crops fresh, by merchants to chill their goods, and by kings and emperors to ensure the comfort of their courts. All of it, from the most humble village to the royal palace, relied on this ancient method of ice preservation, sustained by natural forces. Now, centuries later, the concept of ice storage and refrigeration is everywhere. And you can't help but marvel at how this one innovation, born in a desert, changed the way humans interact with the world. It's like learning to store not just cold, but time itself. After your visit to the garden, you make your way back through Shiraz, stopping at a few local markets along the way. Vendors are selling baskets of fresh fruit, dried herbs, and, inevitably, bottles of cold water. There's a small shop where an elderly man makes ice cubes by hand. Somehow, his method feels almost ritualistic. The sound of the sharp cleaver as he chips away at the frozen block is oddly satisfying. You buy a small bag of ice, and as you take it to your next destination, you can't help but think how remarkably personal ice seems here. It's not just a commodity. It's a way to connect with the past, to honor those who came before you and the practices they perfected. The thought lingers with you as you continue walking, the ice in your hand slipping slowly down to your wrist. And in that moment, you understand the Persian reverence for cold in a deeper way. It wasn't simply about survival in a harsh climate. It was about making life better, more bearable, and even beautiful through thoughtful, intentional design. A small piece of ice wasn't just something to eat or drink. It was a reflection of a larger worldview. The way the Persians preserved food, stored ice, and crafted cooling systems, it wasn't just a matter of necessity. It was about crafting comfort out of the most unlikely of places. It's like they somehow managed to combine nature's harshest elements, heat, dryness, and wind, and turned them into a force that nurtured rather than punished. And now, as the sun sets over Shiraz and the cool desert night creeps in, you find yourself once again facing the quiet paradox of it all. How can something so cold feel so welcoming? Historians still debate the legacy of Persian ice. Some argue it's a forgotten art, destined to fade into history. Others claim that our modern cooling systems, air conditioners, refrigerators, even ice packs, owe a debt to the ancient Persian methods. You take another sip of water, the ice now mostly gone. But the lesson remains. Cold, after all, is not a simple state of being. It's a moment, one that can change everything. The morning light is more forgiving today. Soft, diffused through layers of cloud. The heat hasn't quite caught up, yet the air carries that unmistakable desert warmth, thick and dry. It brushes your skin in a gentle reminder of the world outside the walls of this ancient city, where ice was once a luxury few could afford, but a necessity for all who lived here. Today, your journey takes you to a place that feels almost mythic, a site where the ancient world's understanding of coolness was not just practical, but deeply intertwined with the sacred. Persepolis, the once mighty capital of the Achaemenid Empire, lies waiting. You've heard of it, of course, but who hasn't? The sprawling ruins of the ceremonial city, the massive stone columns still holding up the remnants of Persian grandeur. But what you're really after today isn't just the grandeur, it's the connection to the coolness that made this city tick. This empire thrived in the heat of the Persian plateau. As you walk through the ruins, your feet kicking up dust with every step, it's easy to imagine what it might have been like in its prime. The towering pillars, the intricately carved stone reliefs, and even the grandeur of the Gate of All Nations, all of it's designed to awe and intimidate. But what really draws your attention today is a smaller, less conspicuous feature of the site, the cooling chambers. These aren't the grandiose, showy parts of the city, but more practical structures buried deep within the complex. You know the design well, having seen it before. Low ceilings, thick stone walls, and small openings that align with the distant horizon. These spaces are as functional as they are mysterious. Historians still argue whether Persepolis had a formal cooling system, or if it simply made use of natural geography and the surrounding qanats to keep the temperature down during scorching months. Some believe the city planners used a combination of shade, airflow, and subterranean coolness to regulate temperature without ever needing a formalized air conditioning system. As you stand there near the ruins of what might have been one of those cooling chambers, you begin to picture it differently. It's not just stone and mortar. This room wasn't built merely to protect valuable food stores or keep people from wilting in the midday heat. It was built to create space for ideas. Here in the cool underground chambers, those very same thinkers, bureaucrats, and emissaries who walked the grand halls of Persepolis would have sat, drafted policies, and discussed treaties and negotiations in a temperature-controlled environment. It's strangely fitting, considering how deeply these ancient cultures intertwined temperature with the human condition. The Persians didn't just preserve food or luxury, they preserved the ability to think clearly, to move slowly through the most difficult parts of the day. In many ways, the whole of Persepolis becomes a reflection of this philosophy. Grandiosity paired with simplicity, strength with subtlety, coolness in the midst of heat. You stand in silence, absorbing the quiet majesty of it all. Somewhere in the windless expanse of the ruins, the hum of history seems to echo around you, inviting you to linger just a little longer. From here, your path leads you further into the past, to the sacred Zoroastrian fire temples, where worshippers once gathered around the eternal flame. But you know it's not just the fire that fascinated them, it was the careful balance of opposites. The Persians had long understood the duality of life, heat and cold, fire and ice, light and dark. In their minds, the universe's balance could not exist without the presence of both forces. Cold, just as much as heat, had a divine purpose. As you walk away from the cooling chambers, you think about how these ancient people didn't just shape the land around them, but the very way their people existed in it. The very space they created for living, breathing, thinking. They transformed it into a perfect blend of form and function. The feeling of coolness seems to linger as you climb the steps toward the heart of the city's once majestic palaces. Here, where marble floors have been long worn down by the footsteps of kings and envoys, you can still hear the murmur of negotiations, the hushed voices debating treaties in shaded chambers beneath a desert sun. The contrast between the mighty ruins of Persepolis and the ancient cooling methods used to counter the oppressive heat creates a strange feeling of balance. A sense that the past wasn't simply about survival, it was about finding peace, stillness, and a moment of respite amidst the grand machinery of the world. As you leave the ruins behind, there's a part of you that lingers, just for a moment, feeling the echoes of ancient feet on stone floors, of old cooling chambers filled with whispers and shared knowledge. You start thinking about the legacy of ancient Persia's ingenuity, the way they managed to make a harsh desert environment hospitable. The air today feels different, cooler, more deliberate, as if the stories of this place have somehow seeped into the very wind. And as you walk back toward the bustling modern city, it's impossible to shake the feeling that you're carrying something with you. Something as simple, yet as profound, as the memory of ice and cold in the desert. You pause just for a moment to admire the sky. It's a deep, vibrant blue now, reflecting the coolness of the night to come. The heat of the day has softened, but the world still buzzes with the hum of life. After all, isn't that the essence of what Persia was all about? Balance between heat and cold, chaos and order, life and death. They didn't just store ice, they knew how to store moments. As the sun sinks lower, you find yourself back where you started. You're no longer quite so aware of the heat, no longer so keenly conscious of the need for coolness. You've simply become it. The evening has finally settled in, and Shiraz feels completely different now, cloaked in a soft twilight that gently erases the harshness of the desert heat. You find yourself slowly wandering through the streets, bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Everything around you hums softly, almost like a gentle lullaby, as if the city itself is winding down for the night, preparing to rest under the cool blanket of the Persian sky. As you stroll, you come across a modest street market where the sellers are packing up their goods for the day. The gentle rustling of fabric, the soft clink of coins, and the occasional whistle of a passing breeze make everything feel surreal. Almost like you've entered another time altogether, one where life wasn't defined by deadlines and bustling routines. Instead, everything feels so relaxed, as though everyone here has time to savor the simple things, like a bite of fresh fruit or a sip of cool, sweet pomegranate juice. You can't help but think how, centuries ago, this very market would have been a central hub for the exchange of not just goods, but ideas. This city, one of the oldest in the world, has been a crossroads of culture and commerce for millennia. The Persian merchants here weren't just trading spices, textiles, and jewels. They were exchanging knowledge, mathematical concepts, astrological discoveries, medical techniques. Even the way they kept food fresh and made ice in the desert was an innovation that likely spread through these very streets. The market is bustling with the usual evening activity, but there's something different today. The heat that's followed you all day has softened, and the evening's coolness is starting to settle in. You pause in front of a stall that catches your attention. A small ice vendor who has a stack of bright, glistening blocks sitting on his counter, fresh from his underground ice pit. It's a reminder of how, even today, the ancient cooling methods still persist in the city, still echo through the market and the homes of those who live here. As you stand there, watching the vendor chop the ice with practiced precision, you're reminded of how deeply embedded the art of ice making was in the everyday life of Persians. For them, ice wasn't just something they used to preserve food or drink. Ice was life. It symbolized everything they knew about comfort, luxury, and survival. It was, in many ways, a commodity of the highest order. This vendor is part of a long line of Persian ice makers who learned to make the best of what the land gave them. Some of their methods were closely guarded secrets, passed down from one generation to the next. Historians still debate whether these ice-making techniques were shared with other cultures, or whether they were kept within Persia's borders like a sacred knowledge. In the ancient world, ice was more than just an item, it was a symbol. It represented the human ability to control nature, to adapt to a harsh climate, to create comfort from the unforgiving desert. And it wasn't just a symbol of convenience, it was a symbol of ingenuity. The fact that the Persians were able to create sustainable methods of ice production in a land as hot as this one speaks volumes about their technical brilliance. You watch the vendor finish his work, carefully wrapping the fresh blocks in cloth before placing them into baskets for transport. It's easy to see how the Persians, with their profound connection to nature, were able to create such sophisticated systems of preserving the natural world around them. This wasn't just about refrigeration, it was about creating a living, breathing system that made life just a little bit easier for everyone. As you walk away, you think about the legacy that still lingers in the city. Shiraz, with its cool evenings and ancient gardens, its bustling markets and time-worn bazaars, is a city that hasn't forgotten its roots. In fact, it seems to thrive on them, There's something uniquely comforting in knowing that the techniques of the past, like making ice in the desert, are still very much alive, quietly humming beneath the surface of modern life. You reach a quiet courtyard, where a small fountain trickles in the background, its sound blending seamlessly with the soft whispers of the wind. Here, beneath the cool shade of ancient trees, you finally let yourself relax. Your mind wanders, tracing back through the history of the ice pits, the gardens, and the early cooling systems that once ruled this land. The Persians, so ahead of their time in many ways, understood one thing deeply. Coolness was not just a luxury, but a necessary part of life. It wasn't about escaping the heat, it was about learning to live with it, to make it work for you. And when you think about it that way, every block of ice, every yakshal and cooling chamber, becomes a testament to the human ability to adapt, to improve, and to make life a little more comfortable, even in the harshest of environments. As the light fades, the night air grows cooler and you close your eyes for just a moment, letting the soft sounds of Shiraz wash over you. The faint hum of a distant conversation, the call of a nightbird, and the sound of water falling from the fountain. All of it forms a perfect lullaby, a gentle reminder of the past and how it still carries on in the present. The ice, once the domain of kings and scholars, now serves as a quiet companion to the life unfolding before you. Unassuming, yet essential. And so, with the cool night settling in, you let go of the day's heat, the journey, and the stories that carried you through it all. For now, there's nothing left to do but rest, and let the coolness of the past wash over you. The night feels different now. Soothing, almost like the desert is whispering softly to you, inviting you to drift off. The air has grown cooler with the deepening of the evening, and the once unrelenting sun now seems like a distant memory. In the stillness, all around you, there's a quiet comfort in the way the desert transforms after dark. As you lie beneath the sky, watching the stars begin to pepper the heavens, your mind starts to drift back to the ice, the cool, fresh relief that was once so carefully crafted by ancient hands. The story of the Persian ice makers, the yakchals, and the cooling chambers of Persepolis feels like a dream. But it's a dream with tangible weight. It's a story that connects you to a past full of quiet, unspoken wisdom. Wisdom that was passed down from one generation to the next, not in grand speeches, but in the simple act of making life a little easier in a harsh environment. The more you think about it, the more it seems as if every element of ancient Persia was designed to preserve life in ways that we today might take for granted. The cooling systems weren't just about convenience, they were about survival. Ice was something to be cherished. It wasn't just for cooling water or preserving food. It was for preserving moments, preserving comfort in a world that was, by all accounts, unforgiving. Yet, despite the desert heat and the seemingly impossible challenges of the environment, these ancient cultures were not just enduring, they were thriving. And they were doing so with an elegance, a grace, and a connection to nature that feels almost magical now, all these centuries later. As you lie there, imagining the coolness of the ice seeping into the cracks of the earth, you begin to realize something important. The legacy of those who lived here, the Persians, the ice makers, the philosophers, the kings, is not just in their monumental achievements, but in their quiet ingenuity. They didn't make history by shouting for attention. They made it by understanding the natural world, by respecting it, and by shaping their lives to live more harmoniously with it. And there's something deeply comforting in that idea. Maybe it's because in a world that often feels too fast, too loud, and too demanding, there's something beautiful about the idea of simply making space to breathe, to slow down, to preserve moments of peace, much like those ancient Persians did long before our time. Now, as the night deepens and the stars above shimmer like ancient beacons of guidance, you feel yourself being drawn into that deep, eternal rhythm of the earth. There's a sense of stillness, a quiet hum in the air that encourages you to slow your thoughts, slow your breath, and let go. The last vestiges of daylight fade from the horizon and the coolness settles in completely. You can almost feel it, how the ice of the past has been woven into the fabric of this night, into the quiet, the calm, and the gentle embrace of the desert. It's as if the coolness of ancient Persia is still alive here, gently reminding you that just as they learned to harness the desert's extremes, you too can find comfort, peace, and rest, no matter the circumstances. The world around you has quieted and your own thoughts slow, as if the night has wrapped them in a soft blanket of cool air. All is still. The stars above remain your silent companions. The desert whispers softly and you feel yourself slowly, gently, drifting towards rest. The lessons of Persia, of the Yakchals, and the ingenious cooling systems now fade into the background as you embrace the quiet. You understand now that sometimes the best things are the ones that make life feel just a little more bearable. The simple things like cool water, soft breezes, and the peaceful hum of the world as it winds down for the night. As you surrender to the calm, the desert night seems to hold you in its embrace. It's time to sleep now. Time to rest. Let the stories of the past, the coolness of ancient innovations, and the whispers of the desert lull you into a deep, restful sleep. Good night. Sweet dreams.